Good afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you are joining us from. This is Automation Hour, and I'm Jen Lee. I'm here with Ian Gotts and David Litton, and this is our 52nd Automation Hour. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, all lines are muted. We will ask you to post any questions to the questions feature within GoToMeeting, and we will be posting the link to the recording as well as the deck after the session on our website, automationhour.com, as well as the Trailblazer Community Salesforce Automation Hour. And for our, here are the upcoming sessions that we have for the rest of the year. So we have 4 left, and we will start booking for 2019 shortly. So if you have a business use case with a cool automation solution that you would like to present here, please DM us and we will reach out to you and get you slotted in. And we have to give a shout out to our sponsor, Concrete.io. Without them, we couldn't bring you this free webinar series, and I hope you found the series helpful. And here are your co-hosts, David, myself, and Rakesh. And with that, we're very excited to have Ian back on. He's presented several times on Automation Hour and always has great information to share with the Salesforce ecosystem. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Ian. You should have control now.
There we go, that's me. Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much, Jen. Thank you, David. I want to spend some time talking to you about how you can automate faster, and as it says on the slide there, make it last longer. What I mean by that is, how do I make sure that I build the right stuff? And then how do I make sure that people continue to use that automation, continue to, even if I've left the organization, I've gone to another company, how to make sure that people are still using it. We all build stuff hoping that it gets used forever, or certainly gets used and is valuable. So I want to work out how to make it last longer. And as Jen said, as we go through, if you want to jump in and ask questions, just post them in the chat. What I want to do is, so I want to talk about some principles, and then I want to show you how we actually do it at Elements.cloud. We drink our own champagne. We actually use Salesforce internally. In fact, the previous company I ran, which was called Nimbus, we were a customer from 2001. We used Salesforce across the entire business. In fact, that was way before the App Exchange, way before the ability to download apps. So we built everything ourselves using force.com, so 250 custom objects. So we've been around this for a while. I mean, it's fantastic now that Salesforce there is the App Exchange. It's way easier to automate with all the drag and drop. But I think that also causes maybe some problems. So I think about the scariest word I can hear as an admin is the word just. Someone walks up and says, oh, could you just add a pick list item? Oh, could you just automate this? Oh, could you just add a field? Could you? And we're all keen to please, and we're like, oh yes, I can do that. Of course I can. So pretty quickly, you end up with an org which is almost unmanageable. Maybe it wasn't you who just added something. Maybe it was the consultants were asked to just add it, or maybe it was the admin before you who just added some things. And the difficulty is that org becomes really scary, and it makes it very difficult to maintain. Quite often you hit limits. So a few stories that from talking at various streaming events where I've been, or at world tours, someone I spoke to had maxed out the fields on task. So 500 fields on task. I'll just let you pause for a moment to just think about the implications of that. I was talking to a customer yesterday who said, we've got over 100 pick list values on one of our fields. Can you tell us where they're used? We regularly talk to people who have over 20 record types, over 400 fields on an object. And there are quite a lot of people now trying to do cleanup projects. I don't want to talk about that, but I want to make sure that you don't get yourself into the situation where you are a victim of one of those cleanup projects. So I think there are 3 words that will help you get from scary to happy. They are how, what, and why. And I want to talk through each of those from your perspective as an admin or as a business analyst or a dev, because they are equally true no matter what role you have, whether you're employed by a company, a freelancer, or a consultant. So the first piece is how. So if I'm a Salesforce admin consultant and someone comes to me and says, could you go and build this? Could you implement this change? Could you add this pick list value? Could you add this field? The first question you need to ask is, how is the business process going to work? How is the operation going to work? How will that change the data model I've got? So rather than opening up setup, going to process automation and starting to build it, take the time to try and map out in very simple terms what it is that we're trying to build. So we get shared understanding between both you and the person who requested the change. So this process mapping I'm talking about isn't something which takes weeks and months. I know many of you have been involved in these huge process mapping activities that cover the walls of a boardroom. What I'm talking about is relatively small, relatively tight, quick bit of process mapping, and you'll be staggered by how this simple notation gets a shared agreement, gets out the real nub of exactly what's being asked for. Because quite often you find that a customer, sorry, one of your business users comes to you and says, could you make this change? And once you start understanding what they really want, you can say, well, hang on, we've already built that. That's how Salesforce has been configured. And they're like, oh, God, I didn't realize, thank you. Fantastic, you built something without having to build anything. So you're reusing what you've already got. But it isn't until you get a real understanding, which is a process diagram of this, what's the input, what's the action starting with a verb, who's responsible, what's the output, and start to get that understood in terms of 5, 6, 10 boxes, then you've got a better chance of building, automating exactly what is required. So this is very simple, and I'll show you how this works in practice when we start to show you what we've built internally. But this simple mapping process, you can build as many diagrams as you want. That blue corner, the sort of where it says 1, that shows that there's a lower level diagram that describes what's happening in this process step in more detail. So rather than having like 50 Lucidchart diagrams or 50 Visio diagrams, you can just build one diagram and then have drill downs off it just to keep it simple. But the principle about mapping is all around getting a shared understanding, shared agreement with the user who raised the requirement. And then once you've got that set, you have a far better chance of building the right thing. Which leads me to the next point. Once you've decided what you need to go and build, and then you've gone and built it, you need to relate what you have designed in your process back to the things that you changed inside your sandbox or your production org. So here we've got the structure that says here's your objects down to custom objects, got a custom object right down to fields, list views, process builder workflows, flows, validation rules. It's really useful to relate the things which you've made the change to back to those process diagrams. Why? Because you're not going to throw those process diagrams away, or at least I hope you won't. You're going to use those, so when someone comes back and says, oh, could you make these changes? You would go back to those process diagrams and say, well, this is how the business currently operates. How do you want it to change? When they say, oh, we really want to change that step called present to customer, you can then look at the links and say, okay, in that case, these are the things which we configured in Salesforce. If we change that process, these are the things in Salesforce we need to go and change. So instead of trying to work out what has been built or what has been configured, you have a very quick route straight back into, oh, okay, for this particular step, we use this validation rule. If you want to go and change the process, this validation rule needs to change. So it stops a lot of that detective work. And that idea of relating the process back to the thing inside Salesforce is easy to do. It's a fraction of the time compared with the effort it takes to map the process or build the automation. And the same is true for if you put more custom objects. I know there's a data schema, but I'm afraid that for me is a little bit too complicated. It looks like a massive wiring diagram. So sometimes you just need a simple diagram that just shows the 5 or 6 objects that you are relating. And again, link those back to, this is the new object that we've created, the new custom object, or even this is the standard object that we're using. So that's the what. How was understand how we're going to work. What is the bit that you guys are great at? Building, customizing Salesforce. But I'm saying you need to relate the how back to the what did we build related back to the how. Part of the company that we run, we've actually got the ability to suck all your configuration data out and put it into this tree structure. And then we do some really clever analytics for you, such as, I know, which fields have got data in them? Where is that field used? Which page layouts, which formula fields, which approval processes? But this session isn't meant to be talking about the product, it's meant to be talking about the principles. You can go and run a trial of the app. There's a link at the end if you want to go and do that, and it'll pull out your org and you can start to see that, see all of the analytics. But you can also then use it to relate any documentation, which is the next step, back to the structure. Quick tip here, even if you don't really think you're going to use it, you could still run the trial and then you could run an export at the end of everything that we pulled out of your org. So it's probably the quickest and free way of getting your entire org into an Excel spreadsheet if you wanted to use an Excel spreadsheet rather than using our product. So we've got how does the business work? We've then got what, how do we relate it back to the things we changed? This last step is the most critical step, and it's a bit that never, ever, ever, ever gets done, and it's why you have a scary org. And that's why. I'm sure if I went into your org, I could probably work out what you had changed. The problem is I wasn't there at the time you built it. I don't understand why you did it that way. I also don't understand why you wanted to change it. So a link back to, say, the requirements or the user stories. But the bit at the top, why you configured, that's the documentation that you've probably got somewhere. It's sitting on a hard disk somewhere. It's sitting in some emails, sitting maybe in a wiki. But you need to relate that back to the things that you changed. So I have some context to understand why. And that's the bit that makes your configuration, your customizations, your automation last longer. Because if I inherit your org and I find a bunch of validation rules or some process builder workflows, but I have no understanding about how it relates to the business, the how, and I certainly have no documentation about why you configured it that way, I have no chance of reusing it. The only thing I can do is create a brand new process builder workflow and not use the one that you created. It's almost like the situation we had with Excel spreadsheets. By all means, give me your Excel spreadsheet, but if it's got a ton of macros in there, I won't trust it. It's probably easier for me to build another Excel spreadsheet with macros because I don't understand. I don't understand why the macros work, how they work. So my comment here about the whys, you spend time building specifications, you do whiteboard sketches, you do wiring diagrams, wireframes of screenshots, you maybe have quip documents. It takes very little extra effort to link that why documentation back into what you changed. So those 3 steps, how, what, and why, I think are critical to, first of all, building what the users want, but secondly, documenting it very quickly and easily in a way that it's easy to maintain later. I don't know about you, but I come back to something 6 months, 6 weeks, or in my case, 6 hours later, and I can't remember why I did it. And that documentation is critical to me, otherwise I can't maintain it. And that's a conversation that we're having with customer after customer who are saying, we need to clean up and document our org, but we have no idea what we can and can't delete. And that's really why Elements got created. We were responding to that question, which is, could you pull all the metadata out of Salesforce and then make sense of it for us? So I said I'd show you how we do it ourselves. So I said drinking our own champagne. I prefer that rather than the eating our own dog food terminology. But what I want to do is show you how we have automated our opportunity process, all the way from raise an opportunity through creating a quote, all the way through to getting paid. I didn't do the automation. It was done by our Salesforce admin, who, Jack, fantastic guy, in his 20s, 4 months ago, he had never heard of Elements because we hadn't hired him. He had never heard of Salesforce. Now, you may be thinking that's really scary, but he actually was sitting alongside our COO, who was involved in Salesforce since 2001. He and I ran the previous company. So he was sitting there with someone who had an understanding about how Salesforce worked. But he's got on, used Trailhead, got 60 badges, he's Sponge, he's like soaking up all this information, he's running those trails. But he's following this how, what, why approach. And it's quite interesting. I think we poisoned him forever. He cannot now go back to any other way of doing it. He actually can't understand how anyone could do it any other way, which I think is quite amusing. So anyway, let me show you what he's done. Let's go back to, right, so here I am in elements.cloud. This is our process mapping piece. By the way, this is free forever for as many users as you want. I know a number of people who think of Elements as just being a process mapping tool. We actually do a lot more than that, but let's start here. So what Jack did is he sat down with our head of sales and started to work through what we thought the process was from nurturing a contact, through creating opportunity, qualifying it, progressing it, then starting to assign a price book and products to the opportunity so we could generate a quote, so we could send the quote automatically by email directly out of Salesforce. Customer can authorize the quote, and then we can automatically create an invoice inside Xero, which is our accounting package. And then that invoice is then related back to the opportunity inside Salesforce, but it also updates all the licensing details inside our own application. Invoice is sent to the customer. They can click on a link on the invoice and pay automatically, and money's in the bank. So a relatively complicated process, I would suggest, when you start to look at the intricacies of what stage is an opportunity, what stage is a quote got to get to, how, and therefore validation rules associated with it. There's certainly new fields that got added. There's an integration there to Xero using Integromat. And Jack and Adrian and the team sat and worked this all out, and they've gone and built it, and that's amazing. And provided it works, it's all great. But the first time we want to go and change it, the first time we want to go and anything breaks, then we need some form of documentation to understand how it all works. The other thing, of course, is this process diagram. Let me just turn it into a whole screen. There we go. However many steps. It would be really useful as a salesperson to know that, understand what's actually happening as I work my way through creating an opportunity. So this process diagram wasn't just for Jack to be able to build the application, but he was also thinking about it. You can see it's called Sales Training Map. He also built it with a view to how do our account reps use it to make sure that they use Salesforce properly. So let me just have a quick look through some of these steps. So you can see that this idea of there's a trigger, interesting contact, process called nurture contact, interest at elements at paid level. And I see there's a paperclip there, and associated with the paperclip, there will be some documentation. So let's pick this one, create opportunity. And I can see that under create opportunity that there are 3 links to things inside Salesforce that we've gone and configured: opportunity, record types, and stage. Let's pick another one. There we go. Qualification of qualify opportunity. I see there's a note there. Okay, so this is actually what I need to be able to qualify. I need to assign to an SDR. Okay, so there's some sort of helpful training type material attached to some of these boxes. Here we go, assign a price book and add products to opportunity. Let's make this a bit bigger so you can actually see what I'm talking about. Assign a price book and add products to opportunity. Actually, that's quite complicated inside Salesforce. There's a note here. Wow, okay, so we've got different price books. There's some notes about it. And then there's a link there to assigning a price book, and there's a Google Doc there that explains how I do this. So we're making this training material as well as configuration material. So I can see at the top there, some training. At the bottom, I've got a link back to a price book, products on opportunity for later stage, which must be, I presume that's a, I don't know what that is. Let's go and open it up and have a look. So it's opening up that link in that tree structure. So there it's a validation rule. So I can start to see the validation rule. So let me just go back for a moment and show you what I'm looking at. We have this tree structure which we pull out of Salesforce. This is part of our Elements paid product. This is the thing I said that you can run the free trial and export all this information as an Excel spreadsheet later if you want, or you can continue using it. It's priced at $2 per admin per day. So you can start to see I have a tree structure here that goes all the way down to, let's go to the top level to start with. I can see this is giving me a summary about what's in my org. And in this tree structure, let's look at objects. So I can click on objects, it opens up objects. Let's look at, say, standard objects. Open that up. Open up, let's go down to opportunity. So now at the opportunity level, it's giving me a summary about what's in my opportunity, including how many records by record type. But I can then see all the fields. So I'm right down at field level, or I could look at, say, validation rules. So there are 2 validation rules there, again, giving me some information about it. So that's the principle of this tree structure. You can do a couple of things. One is, so let me just go back for a moment. At an object level, I get a summary. I can link to any documentation. So I can look and see which process diagrams that are linked to. So I can see where the opportunity object is being used. I could also add other documentation, which is notes, screenshots, and so on. We also do usage. So we'll tell you which fields have got any data in them. So do you remember that time when someone said, oh, could you add all those custom fields for me? Look, there are a bunch of fields there. Excuse me, bunch of fields there which have got no data in there at all. So we can start to see field population at an object level. But if I go down to a field level, let's pick any one of these, contract ID. Same thing, I've got details about what it is, any documentation that's been added. So let me add there we go. There's a custom field called customer reference, and there's some documentation that says, why did we create it? And then usage. So I notice that there are no records in there at all, which is quite interesting. And I can see that it's not used anywhere at all. So I've got to ask the question, why do we have that? Why do we have that that custom field? Here's a different one, Elements ID. I can see that it is populated by record type, and I can see that it's used in 7 page layouts. So again, some really valuable information here when I start to try and work out whether I can or can't delete things. Or more importantly, if I'm intending to use that particular field in an automation, what else is using it? Is there another automation using it? Is it critical maybe to a Einstein Analytics? Is it used in an integration? So this is really important stuff in terms of getting an understanding about what's already been built before I start building on top of it. So let's just go back for a moment to that validation rule. So we can now see, let me take you back from where we started. So we're on this products on opportunity for later stage. So I'm trying to work out for this step here called assigned price book box 5. I've got some notes about it, but I noticed that one of these, there's a validation rule that's been used on it. So if I just click on that, it'll open it up again for me at exactly the right place in my tree structure. And now I can start to see a summary about how that validation rule works, which we pulled, but also some documentation. Here's the reason for that validation rule. The validation rule's in place so sales teams have to add a product when the stage is greater than 50%. This stops us having opportunities at sales engaged procurement with no products and therefore affecting the forecast moving forward. Fantastic. I now understand what was in Jack's mind when he built this validation rule. I can't determine that from the description, create opportunity at sales qualified and add products. I could probably work it out from the rules, but I don't understand the thinking behind it. And that's where that documentation becomes so important. He must have thought about it. He knew what to write. He just didn't have anywhere to write it until we had this structure to connect it to. And there I can see that it's also linked back to that process step. So I can see that it links back to that process diagram. So let me just pick one other area where I know we've done a lot of automation. That was just a simple validation rule. But if I go further on, I know that the whole process of being able to trigger an invoice automatically comes off the back of this step 9. So if a customer is authorized to quote, we need to do some things to make sure that the 0 automatically creates an invoice and sends it to the customer. So this is a massive saving in time for our account reps. They get an accepted quote, they change 2 statuses, and the invoice is automatically created and then linked back to the space. I happen to know that. So this says here, we need the space, which is a custom object, needs to have contact billing address and made set to be ready for invoice. And we need to update the opportunity to closed won. And to do that, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are specific fields that we touch. There are some validation rules. So there are a whole series of things, all these things called org model nodes. They are all the things inside Salesforce that we have specifically created or customized to make step 9 work. So this is the critical part of what. So box 9, we understand what we're doing, how. Now on the right hand side you can see what. What did we go and change? If I click on that one, that link, there's a validation rule. I can now open up that validation rule inside that structure. There are the rules. There's the documentation. That's why we're doing it this way. Now I'm showing you this inside a product called Elements, but you equally well could do this using, I guess, a free application. You could use our free process mapping. You could export this tree structure as an Excel spreadsheet, and then you could make those connections, I guess, from URLs from your Excel spreadsheet to the documentation and from your Excel spreadsheet back to a process diagram. The only question then is, how do you keep that Excel spreadsheet up to date? So that tree structure that I'm talking about gets synchronized every night and will tell you anything that changes. And we'll also give you a bunch of really interesting analytics off the back of it. So things like, oh, let's look at what percentage of descriptions are completed in the descriptions field inside Salesforce. Let's look at how that's changed over time. So you can see that we internally have gone through a big exercise of actually making sure descriptions were completed. Jack inherited an org where the previous admin hadn't really understood what they were doing. There were a ton of objects that got created, a ton of process builder workflows which have been thrown away. And therefore, there's been a big activity to go through internally to create new stuff and document it as we go. So anything which is not documented is being deleted. So we're doing a cleanup and build simultaneously. We've got some other interesting things. So back to that field trip view, which fields have got any data in them? And I think the interesting one is how many custom fields per object. Let's go back. I can filter this. Let's get rid of manage packages. And I can see that we're actually in pretty good shape. I'm sure if you ran this report for your orgs, it would look a lot scarier than this. But we've deliberately tried to keep this as lean as possible in terms of our implementation. But bear in mind, the implementation is only 3 years old. The other interesting thing is things like email templates used over time, or even back to users by profile. So of the different profiles or users by permission set, or when did people last log in using a particular profile? Again, really useful when you're starting to clean up the org or understand whether for a particular automation you're going to use a particular profile. So you can see that some of the profiles, those red ones, no one's ever logged in using those. So let me just go back and summarize what we've looked at. Just go back to my PowerPoint deck. What I've been talking about is the whole principle of documenting how things work. And so you could use the Elements free product, you could use Visio, PowerPoint, whatever you want. You then need to link it back to a view of what you've configured in your org. You could use Elements. You could use Elements to export it to an Excel spreadsheet. You could use, I guess there are some other utilities where you can export it to an Excel spreadsheet. But again, you need to question how you keep that up to date. And then most critically, you need to make sure that the documentation on why you configured it is somewhere linked back to that content. So that's fantastic. That's all about building your application. The question then is how to make sure people use it properly. So if I just go back to Salesforce for a moment and I go and look at an opportunity. So here's an opportunity inside our own org. And you can see there's the information about this particular opportunity, but you can see there's a custom tab in there called Process. And that's a Lightning component, still part of our free product. You can drop a Lightning component into, or a Visualforce page if you're not on Lightning. And you can then drop any diagram into that object. And it's a live diagram. So when I click on things and I want to see how to do things, all those links are still there. If I want to drill down, I see that one there has a drill down. Where was it there? If I drill down, there's the lower level diagram, and I can navigate my way up. And if I don't understand something, I could always ping the person who's editing it an email. And you can drop any diagram into any object. So here, if I go and open up the quote, so I have a process tab there. It's exactly the same process diagram. And because it's a live diagram, it's not a screenshot. The moment it gets updated in the Elements application, and then it gets published, so there's a versioning cycle, provided it gets published, then immediately I'm seeing the most up-to-date version. So this is essentially self-help training material, and it's invaluable to our reps because they get confused about what stage should say the quote go to, what stage should an opportunity go to make it to the next step. And the moment we documented this sort of sales process map, we suddenly discovered that we were getting more accurate opportunities because they were being put in the correct stage. And we found that the reps could create quotes on their own without any support. So there is a second benefit in actually starting to think about and document how you work, because you can then use it as training material. Now, you might have lots of other process diagrams which are more complicated than this to describe exactly how you do your automation. Fantastic. You don't need to expose those to the users. You simply determine which diagram ID you want to display inside this Lightning component. In fact, why don't I just do that? If I go and say edit page, and I look at that particular component, so there's the process tab. On the right hand side, there's a, when you install the managed package, it pulls in this Lightning component called elements diagram view. That diagram ID, those 22 digits, let me go to this diagram over here. There is the diagram ID down there. So if I want this diagram to appear inside that page, I simply enter that diagram ID. And whenever the diagram gets updated, it will always produce the most up-to-date diagram sitting in this window. And again, that diagram ID could be linked. This is the quote page. It could be in the opportunity page. It could be in the products page, the price page. So this is your way of building the process diagrams to help you automate, but then the process diagrams to help you train your users to use what you built correctly. And none of this is difficult to do. All of this is stuff that you have to do anyway. The trick is pulling it all together to make sure, A, you build the right things for the users more quickly. Secondly, you've documented it so it gets continued to be used, but also it's the end users get to see how it works, so they use it correctly, which is what the whole aim of this is. We need to be building stuff that take our users forward. So I'm happy to take any questions. Oh, let me just go to the last thing. One question is, if I want to go and have a play with this, or I want to use the free process mapping, or I actually want to use that tree structure, you can go to the App Exchange, search for Catalyst, or there's a short code Catty app, and there's a quick start, 4 clicks, it sets it all up for you. The synchronization of your org into our tree structure takes, I don't know, 5 minutes if it's a dev org. I think our largest org, we synchronize about 60,000 customizations. It takes about 2 hours. And on the back of that, we're doing all that analysis for you, the field usage, the field trip type stuff. At the end of those 14 days, you've got a couple of options. You upgrade and say, yeah, I want to carry on, or you go back to free, so you just get the process mapping, and you export your org model into Excel. And we've built a couple of things to try and help you. We built a trail to take you through what I've just been talking about. So it's not on Trailhead. Unfortunately, my Trailhead's not available yet. So we've built it in the Trailhead style, and there's a short link there to it, bit.ly Catty Trail. And we're taking all the principles and writing it in a book. The book's not quite finished. It's probably a week or two away from being finished, but if you click on that link, you can go and register, and we'll send you a free copy of the ebook the moment it's available. So very happy to pick up any questions. And let me just check the chat. So whilst people are posting any questions, one of the questions I get asked is, so where can I see you? Well, obviously you can go online and go and use it. There are some videos there, some training videos. We're also very active out in the user community. The next event, well, we're currently at Florida Dreaming. The next event, I think, is Northeast Dreaming up in Manchester, and also French Touch Dreaming in Paris. And after that, I'm speaking at New York World Tour on December the 13th. But also there are, if you register, then we'll tell you about webinars that we're running as well. There's a link on our website to the latest recorded webinar, which is sort of something very similar to this. We're also recording this automation hour, so that we can that will then be published and people can have access to it.
All right. Thank you, Ethan.
A question about process mapping and drawing those process diagrams and the thinking behind the approach. So let me go back to that slide. Yeah, this very simple approach, people sort of go, well, where are all the shapes? Where are the float? Where are the swim lanes? This is an approach we've used probably for the last 20 years in everything from huge organizations such as we were the global standard at Nestle or Chevron or Bank of Montreal, where they had thousands, tens of thousands of diagrams. This simple approach of input, activity box, output can be used to describe anything as complex as the whole way a bank works, all the way down to a detailed level, which is exactly how that process builder workflow will work in terms of spitting out, posting to Chatter and updating an object. So you don't need to have lots of different shapes. You can see here that, let me just make this diagram a bit bigger and go to this box here. You see that box called Deliver Proposal. You can see that actually there's a decision happening inside that box. We're saying opportunity is it needs analysis. It's going to come out of, you can't see the line because of the way we did the image, but there's a line coming out of Deliver Proposal. But inside Deliver Proposal, there must be a decision that says if the proposal is greater than 50K, review proposal and then approve it and send it back. So the whole idea of having decision boxes, you can make those decisions inside a process diagram. The reason we've done that is it makes the diagrams a lot tighter. It makes it a lot easier to understand. That's the first thing. The second thing is people say, why don't you have swim lanes? We do have swim lanes in the product, but forget the product for a moment. Think about what we're trying to achieve. We want to know about handoffs. The handoffs are here. We can see that present to the customer is done by sales management, research the customer is done by sales admin, review the proposal is done by VP of sales, deliver proposal is sales management. If they were swim lanes, we'd have to have 3 separate swim lanes and we'd make the diagram kind of weird because it actually would have to try and get the boxes onto the correct swim lanes. And therefore the diagrams end up a lot larger. They end up being more complicated to read. Again, which fails the test of can I get my end users to read these to make sure they follow, it's the operations manual for the company. So this approach, yes, you can draw swim lanes. Yes, you can use essentially these boxes as different shapes. But this very simple diagramming approach has proved to be really effective from a business analysis perspective. And part of the ebook which we've written, and also that Catty Trail goes into a bit more detail explaining the thinking behind how the approach works. And there's some very short videos that we've got that tell you how to do the process mapping really well. This is, I think, the most valuable skill as an admin that you need, is being able to draw these process diagrams and ask the questions of your users to make sure you build the right thing. If I see any failing around Salesforce ecosystem, it's the lack of business analysis, this idea of just rushing straight into setup and starting to build. What we really ought to be doing is asking the question, why? How's this meant to work? How do you want me to do this? No, I don't understand that. How would I do that? Oh, well, we already do that. Oh, do you? So this idea of getting it out, and therefore it's a shared agreement, whether it's sitting face to face or whether you're doing it over a webinar, drawing these process diagrams is really powerful. Just to give you one story, I was working with one of the larger Salesforce ISVs on their internal work, and they said they wanted to improve their partner process, which was fantastic. So I went and facilitated a 2-hour workshop for them. In those 2 hours, we took what they had taken in 2 weeks to draw 8 boxes on a screen, which didn't really make sense. In 2 hours, we turned 2 weeks worth of work into something which everybody in the room agreed, understood. It satisfied the 300 partners split across the 5 different partner types. And they're using now that as the basis of how they drill into more detail to understand how to make the partner program work, but also then how they look at how their Salesforce implementation supports that partner process. So don't underestimate the simplicity of this approach. It's actually really powerful in terms of the way it's applied. Sorry, that was a very long answer to a short question, which is, can you tell me about the mapping approach? We've been talking about this for 20 years, so I pretty much spend time on my soapbox talking about this. But I genuinely believe that this piece of the 3 steps is once you've learned it, is the most valuable in terms of building the right stuff. I think the things that are really easy to do, which doesn't take any learning, is the why. The idea of taking any documentation and linking it back to what you've built as a way of making sure that you can support the changes you've made. So there's a question. So someone said, is that link for the trail meant to go to Box? Absolutely. It's not a trailhead trail. It's a PDF stored in Box, which is written as though it is a trail in Trailhead. We've written it in the same style, but it isn't in Trailhead. So yes, it's taking you to a PDF in Box. So another question coming in here, which is, what's the advice for getting started on a very old org that's been administered by various admins? Do you just begin with one fairly simple business process? That's a great question. Something we answer in the book and the trail, but I'll tell you now. Our thinking is, first of all, don't try and boil the ocean. Don't try and document or understand how the entire org works. A lot of people say, well, I'll look at all the Apex triggers first, then I'm going to go and look at all the page layouts. Because everything is so interconnected, as you saw from the way we built our opportunity process, it's very difficult to unpick. Instead, I think you should come at it from an operational perspective, and let's say pick off one object and say, let's think about how opportunity works, supported by, say, contact and account, or let's look at how the case object works. So start with a fairly simple business process, pick something you know that is manageable, because I think the other thing is all eyes will be on you. People will be going, well, why aren't you building this stuff? Why are you spending time trying to clean up the org? So you need to find some quick wins. So pick an object where it clearly is, maybe the page layouts are slow to load because you've got so many fields. Cases is obviously a place where a lot of people go. Opportunity is another one, or a place where we've got a lot of different record types. Think of it, take that area, and then map out the life cycle, rather like we did around opportunity, and just map it out very simply. And then start to, as you go through for every step, what did I use? What's configured inside Salesforce? So for each step is along the process, what's been configured in Salesforce? Great. Now we found that. Why did we do it? Can I find any documentation which is linked to why we created the customization? And step your way through that. And again, if you're using elements, you could then use the tagging. So you could tag various items and say, right, we've looked at this, or we've reviewed it, or tag it and say this can be deleted. So I think that's the approach that I would take with a very old org. I mean, you could run the org analytics and take a view and say, do you know what? Actually, there's so much in here, and there's so much we don't understand. We see a lot of customers saying, well, actually, the quickest way to get to Lightning is start again. Not an ideal answer, but again, at least you have the data to start to make those sorts of decisions. Another question that came in that said, you install the managed package, so everything you're looking at, is that on Salesforce? No, it isn't. Sorry, I should have said that. Our application runs on AWS. So let me go back to, where are we? Our application sitting here runs on AWS. So that's why we've got all the requirements here. We've got our orgs, our process diagrams, and so on. The managed package is the integration which allows you to pull this reference data, or build this org model, sorry, from all of your configuration data. So the managed package does a couple of things. When you install it, it creates the new login for you on AWS. It creates the link to the managed package. It creates the space. It creates the trial for you and does the sync. So it's doing a lot of work for you. But yes, you would, to see this, as you can see, it's just a straight URL. I'm logging into our application on top of AWS. So a question in the chat came about just about pricing. So I said $2 a day. Is that $2 per user? The answer is absolutely not. It's $2 a day per editor. So I've said per admin, but anyone who needs to edit the content, anyone who needs to add, if you've gone for the model where you're using all of that tree structure, then anyone who needs to create a process diagram, anyone who needs to add documentation is paid $2 a day, 50% discount for non-profit. Anybody who wants to view it or collaborate, because there's the whole ability to have discussions about any item, that's free forever. So viewers are always free. If you decide not to go for that and you go back to the free model, then free is you get to do process mapping, and that's free forever for editors, it's free for viewers. So a very simple model. If you just want to do process mapping, fantastic. If you want to use the whole of that org management capability, then anyone who edits process diagrams or adds any content to this tree structure needs to be an editor, and that's $2 a day or $1 a day if you're a non-profit.
We've got a question. So it's about kind of the integration part of this. So is the sync set up typically with like integration user account, or can you use your admin account? How does that work?
Great question. So the integration, you simply set it up using an admin account. So you do the installation using the admin account. After that, we're using the APIs. We're using the metadata and tools API. So it's not using, you don't need an account to run the synchronization. So it's not using up one of your user accounts. And you can set the synchronization up. Once you've set it up once, you can, after the first setup, you can then set it to run automatically every night. And it will then email you what's been changed overnight.
So when you say, you said using the SOAP API?
Yes, so yeah, using the metadata API and the tools API are the two APIs we use.
Okay. And then you said you can schedule to be nightly. So is that typically what most people do, or can you schedule it to be like real time?
Okay, so a couple of things. One is you can kick a sync off at any time if you want to. As of Monday, the latest release, you can do a partial sync. So you could just say, oh, we've added this object, we've added a bunch of new things, just sync this little area of the org model, which makes it really quick. So that comes back in a matter of a minute or two. And you can set up the automated sync every night.
Is that something like with Apex where you could schedule that out to be like every hour? I know with like Doug's mass action scheduler, you can do that.
Not really, because it's running inside our application rather than inside Salesforce. I don't think you'd really want it to run every hour. I mean, to be honest, when we do the full sync, we're pulling absolutely everything. I said one customer, we pull 60,000 items. We do 48,000 field lookups. So, and we're doing 4 million field access lookups. So you don't want to have that running every hour. You want to have that run nightly. But if you say we've done some work and I want to see the latest view, that's why we created this partial sync, which comes back. And then you can just say, right, I know we've done a bunch of work on case object. Bring everything back for the case object.
Perfect.
One other question we get asked all the time, which was, which org should I sync? The answer is all of them. So production and sandboxes. So inside that workspace, you can synchronize, you install the managed package into a production and into sandboxes if you want. Each one of those will have a separate tree structure. So inside our application, you would then see a tree structure for each of your orgs, sandbox, production, multiple sandboxes in production. You can then run reports to compare sandbox with production. Fantastic. The question then gets asked is this thing here. Where should I link the documentation to? Should I link it to production or to sandbox? The answer is it doesn't matter. Those links that you saw are not held at an org level, they're held behind it at an implementation level. So if I add a note or a comment or a link to a process to an item in a sandbox, if that same item exists in the other sandboxes in production, it's immediately available in there too. So as you deploy from sandbox to production, all that documentation follows through. So from a architectural perspective, we've thought really long and hard about the way to make this work, so that you could have consultants working on your sandbox doing work around, I know, a new partner object. You've got your internal team working on a sandbox associated with the opportunity process. And if they are touching the same objects and they are doing work on it, they will all see each other's documentation appearing in it. Fantastic for managing conflicts. Again, I'm not quite sure how you would do that with an Excel spreadsheet.
Okay. Looks like we got one more question in there.
Can you push data from elements to Salesforce? Field descriptions. You read our mind. It was due to be in this release, but it didn't make it into testing. It will be available by the end of November. So where are we? End of October. So the end of November release. One of the things which was built but didn't get through testing in time was the ability to push descriptions and help text from elements back into Salesforce. So we pull the descriptions and we don't pull the help text, we will pull the help text. So if you look in a tree, let's just find one for you. There's no point going to custom because let's go to a custom object. Hang on. You can see there the text in italics is the description. There we go. That description, we're also going to pull the help text through, but you will be able to update the description and the help text from elements, and it will push it back into Salesforce. And that's in the next release. That's November. Future plans, we're building the ability to pull data from third-party integrations so that you can then see which fields are used in, say, that MuleSoft integration or that Informatica integration. That work is currently ongoing. The last piece, next year sometime, we're going to build data models for you, so you don't need to use the data schema. So you can select the objects on the left-hand side and we'll build a data model for you that you can read and understand. So there's a ton of stuff we're doing, but it's being driven by customers saying, can you do this? Can you do that? It would be great to see that. So an example was the guy yesterday saying, I've got 100 pick list values. Could you tell me if they're used? So that's in the roadmap and it's already being built, I believe. It's really useful, really simple. We've got the metadata, easy to display. So this whole idea, we try and display it as usage, I guess, on a field. So let's pick a field, usage. So we'd say where it was used. This one's not used in anything, but under that where used, I'm assuming if it were pick list item, we'd show which pick list items were used. I don't know how the UI is going to work yet, but there's an example of someone suggesting a change, us going, great idea, people asking for that, let's get it in the app. So thank you for listening. Happy to answer any questions. Ping me an email, hit me on Twitter, at Ian Gotts or ian@elements.cloud, and let me know how you get on.
All right,
David
thank you so much,
Jen,
Ian.
thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, everybody.